We will now reconvene. According to Mike Morgan, it's time to reconvene our meeting, so let's go forward. We're on item number 16, page 159 of your agenda. 2004 water certificates of participation. Mr. Brooking?
Yes, ma'am. I have a short update on the status of that outstanding debt. Little history, the certificates were issued in 2004, roughly $87.7 million to purchase 42,000 acres of farmland. They were 30-year bonds or certificates of participation maturing in 2034. Over the last couple of years, we've defeased or paid off a considerable amount of the outstanding debt. Originally, it was $87 million. As you can see, we paid off all the serial bonds and the two of the three term bonds. Total principal that we defeased was $47 million, and it resulted in an annual debt service reduction of $4.2 million through the year 2027. We have the one term bond outstanding. It's due in 2034. It's currently about $36 million of outstanding principal. We're estimating the cost to defease that of about $43.5 million. And that's really a function of two facts. One is we can't call the bonds until 2014, and because of considerable negative arbitrage is why the cost to defease those is more than the outstanding debt at this point. We do plan on, or at least I plan on, defeasing the remaining term bond with future land sales as they become available. We're anticipating for 2011 about $28 million of sales. So if that were to occur, I think what we would be able to do is pay off about half of that remaining bond, which the current interest payment on that bond is about $2.2 million. If we were able to generate about 23 or 24 million in sales, we could pay off half the bond and reduce the annual interest expense to about 1.1 million. And that is through 2027, then it increases up for between 27 and 34 before it's finally paid off. So that was my update on those bonds.
And that's it for information only. Any questions or comments from the board?
I have a couple of questions. Mr. Broking, okay, we've got about 28 million on the books and escrow that possibility of closes before the end of 2011. We'll pick up another $28 million, correct?
Well, some of that has already closed this year. That's what we're forecasting for the entire year. So we.
Okay, well then I think you've got more than that, because right now, don't you have an escrow close to 25 million in escrow right now that hasn't closed?
It's about 20 million, I believe. It's in escrow.
Well, we just made another deal today on some more. But anyway, okay, my only question is, you've got it takes 43.5 million to pay everything off. It's remaining the roughly 35 or 36 million, correct?
Yes, their current estimate.
So if you bring in the other 28 million, you're about 15.5 million short of paying everything off. Is that correct?
It's close. Some of the land sales that have already occurred this year, we've used to pay debt service. So
Okay.
That's why I'm saying, well,
The reason I ask you to bring this forward, to at least put it on the agenda, is because I know we've been making land sales, and the goal is to try to get all the debt paid off and then have, 12 or 15,000 acres left over that the IID sits on, so we don't have to sell any more ground. And if you've got 15.5 million in debt still out there after you close this 28 million at 4,000 an acre, you got about 4,000 acres more to sell to get the debt completely paid off. And I just want to know, moving forward, when people ask to buy some of the ground, we need to start thinking about what we're doing and how we're doing it before we're getting close to the finish line, so we make some proper decisions on how we're handling some of these sales. That's the only thing. So what I would like, are you going to bring this back again? You won't bring this back anymore. This is basically an information item.
This is information if these lands that are in escrow close escrow and we have enough money to defease a large part of the remaining term bond, I will come back with that proposal.
Yeah, but what I would like to know is, if any more land sales come up, we need to think about how much we're going to sell the ground for, what we're going to do in order to try to get this thing paid off as fast as possible. That's all. I just don't want
I
to keep
agree.
making land sales without knowing how far we are from getting it totally paid off. So if you could
Yes.
figure some of that out, I'd appreciate it, okay?
I will.
All right, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? If not, move on to item number 17, page 164 on your agenda, water transfer financial update.
This is the third update I've given on the water transfer financial projections. And as we did last year, I'll make the offer to the Water Conservation Board to make this presentation to their group if they would like me to do that. Briefly, I'll go over what we're going to talk about today. The update since last August. We'll do a financial projection comparison. I'll have some numbers on the capital projects. We have cash flow projections. Talk a little about the challenges and risk associated with the transfer and the projection, the tentative financing plan, and then we have one slide that shows what would happen in 2012 with and without the QSA. Just an update on the pricing. Currently, San Diego County Water Authority is paying $446 an acre foot for water. That escalates 10% a year for the next 3 years and 5% the last year. So by 2015, they will be paying $624 an acre foot. Over the last year, we were able, with the help of our lobbyist, to, I think, reach an agreement with the iBank as to what their guarantee would be. Obviously, when we get to the point of issuing bonds, we would have to work with them, and there would be numerous documents that we'd all have to agree to, but I think we are in agreement as to what their role will be in any future financing. And then right now, this is just the current forecast, and it's just, in my mind, is subject to change depending upon litigation, because at this point, I wouldn't recommend borrowing any money until all the litigation is resolved. But we have 13 and 16 as tentative years where we would need to borrow money for the water system conservation plan, and that would be net of the clawback for the water transfer capital expenditures, which is we basically used the $50 million that we couldn't be clawed back at that time that the water authority has provided us. So if you look at the net cash, we're showing 4 years because it had original 2004 projection, and then I've done updates in 9, 10, and 11. You'll see the net cash line, there was a big jump between from 9 to 10 as a result of higher prices the water authority is going to pay us and the $50 million that they provided us. You'll notice that this year's projection is not that much different from 2010. It is down about $40 million, but compared to $2.8 billion, it's not that large a percentage. So this is a summary of the revenue over the last 3 years. In particular, the last year, we're estimating maybe $5 million higher than what we did last year. So there hasn't been a lot of change in the revenue projection. You'll see pretty much the same thing on the O&M projection. It has gone up a little since the last year. We're still forecasting about $2.3 billion on on-farm program gross payments. This is just a listing of the projects and an estimated amount of $283 million. These are the initial capital projects. I'm not going to go over all of those. This graph shows the cumulative impact of the water transfer based on our projection from 2009 to 2047. And you can see that the impact is roughly a $3 billion increase. And I'm talking about increase, I'm talking about cash. And then on the flip side, the water department, their projection shows about a $1.9 billion cumulative decrease or deficit over these last almost 40 years, 38 years. And we do have in our forecast $1 acre-foot increases for all the customer classes beginning in 2021, and I think that's a period of 6 years where we're forecasting a $1 increase. So some of the opportunities that the transfer is providing the district, it allows in our forecast $2.3 billion to the local agricultural community for our on-farm conservation. It allows for capital expenditures of the water transfer and the water department from 2020 through 2047 to be funded from rates, minimizing the need to borrow. And it maintains coverage despite debt service coverage, despite the $1.9 billion cumulative shortfall from core water department operations, and minimizes the need for rate increases. So the challenges and risk, one thing that I can't repeat enough is these assumptions will change and will continue to change, and they have changed. It's, you know, we're making these forecasts over a very long period of time, and we're giving it our best shot that we have, but we know things, they just have a way of changing, and they'll go up or down. On the near term, the revenue from the Water Authority, we've got that locked in. We're very confident of that, but the expenses are a little more difficult to estimate, especially going out 38 years. The other challenge or risk, major one, is the QSA litigation, still ongoing. It's unclear how it'll be resolved. Just kind of waiting right now. And then, you know, once the litigation gets behind us and it's time to start the construction projects, we've got to meet the water conservation levels on time. So that'll also be a kind of an engineering challenge. The financing plan I alluded to a little earlier. Through 2013, we'll use about $25 million of the $50 million that the Water Authority has given us. We'll use that to start funding the capital projects. And then if, you know, as I said, if my recommendation, if there's no litigation outstanding by 2013 or before 2013, if it gets resolved before then, we could start borrowing and start building the projects. Right now I have it a 2-year or 2-time financing over those in 13 and 16 is what our best guess is at this point. Depending on litigation, that could change too. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to mention was those, we haven't updated the cost of those projects in a while. We're using, I think, 2006 estimates at this point. I know there's been a long period of very minimal inflation, but until you actually go out to bid for these projects, you're really not going to know how much they cost. So in summary comparison, if you look at the water transfer net cash between 10 and 11, you see a slight drop. I think that's about $37 million decrease. But if you go down to the total water department net cash, you'll see a fairly large increase. And that's really the result of one change. We've refined our interest income projection this past year. And at the time, I thought it was a pretty good projection, but what's happened recently, I'm not sure, because interest rates keep coming down. We projected earning 1% on our money in 2011 and 2% in 2012 and 3% in 2013. Then I think we levelized it out at 3% for those remaining years. That may, in the near term, that may turn out to be something that we have to adjust again and lower. I think at some point 3% over the long term is fairly reasonable, but it just keeps getting pushed further and further out as to when that's going to happen.
Excuse me, Mr. Brokey. Mr. Jordan, do you have a question now, or you want to wait till he finishes his presentation?
You can finish it.
Okay.
So at the end of the day, at the end of the contract period, what we're projecting after we pay all our expenses, pay for all our capital projects, including replacing about $1.4 billion of existing assets that the water department has, that there will still be $800 million left over as a result of the transfer over these 38 years. And this is 2012. I know it's kind of a busy slide, but we tried to list main revenue and expense components. The first column we have is with the QSA, what we expect to be able to generate, and you see it's kind of a tight band on the revenue side, roughly $31 million of revenue, or net revenue, I'm sorry. It's net revenue. But if you look at the second column, without the QSA in the ranges, you see we lose most of our revenue. We lose a lot of our expenses, but not all of our expenses. So we're thinking that for that particular scenario, we'll either be negative $5 million or positive $3 million. And so the difference, or the impact between the two, is the last column, and it doesn't look good for either of the ranges. It's a negative 28 million to a negative 36 million. And so there are a lot of assumptions that go into this, and we can't really estimate how they'll all play out as far as what expenses we'll have to pay and what we won't have to pay and what we can get rid of. But one thing is for certain, that if we don't have an agreement with the Water Authority, they're not going to be paying us $44 million.
Come again, I didn't hear you say that.
I said if we don't have an agreement with the Water Authority for 2012, they won't be paying us the $44 million that we will be budgeting as if we did have the agreement. So that's kind of a what-if scenario. I don't expect it to happen, but you never know, and it's good to show. It's good to show.
The reason that I asked for this to be brought forward is because I know that there was talk out there about the QSA hanging on by a thread, and that possibly this thing was going to go away. And so I asked what would happen if the year 2012 there was no QSA. So basically we would have no revenue coming in from the QSA. And so what would you do if there was no QSA and we burned through $30 or $35 million? So how would you take care of that problem?
Well, the Water Department does have reserves that in the short run could stabilize them and take them over for a while. But obviously you don't want to burn through your reserves, so you'd have to come up with another revenue source, because I don't think you can cut your expenses enough to make it cash flow positive in the short term. So you'd either have to find someone else to transfer water to or increase rates. Those are the two options I'm coming up with, within a combination of lowering expenses too.
Yeah, and I know we need a contingency plan on what would happen. I think that we need to consider that, because the QSA has been going on since 2003 and the money's been coming in. But you never know what's going to happen.
That's correct.
I think we'd better be prepared, because we've become dependent on the QSA money.
And that kind of leads me into the last slide that I have. For 2012, we're estimating that the QSA is going to represent 37% of the revenue for the entire department. But over the life of the contract, or at least from I think 2009 to 2047, we're estimating that the QSA will be almost 2/3 of the total revenue. So you can see from this point forward, the QSA will become a greater percentage of the department's revenue.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate you bringing these numbers forward.
Mr. Jordan, did you have a comment or a question?
Thank you, Chairman Mendoza. Rusty Jordan from Brawley. I think this is an example that perfectly underscores some of the disconnect between government agencies and private individuals. We're going to have, by his number, $8.5 billion over till 2046 come in. And 3/4 of that is going to be consumed by the district that spills a couple 100,000, 200,000 or 300,000 acre feet a year to make that more efficient and improve all of that. 1/4 of the money, $2.3 billion, is going to go to individuals who don't have to pay prevailing wage, that don't have to over-engineer things. They only have to deliver savings, as in your equitable distribution plan, where they just get X amount of acre feet and they have to live within it. If, instead of taking 3/4 of the money to operate the government bureaucracy, which is what is the American way, we were to take that money and allocate it to the land, the farmland, the farmers could conserve the water, continue to have the economy, and create a tremendous asset base from which to build capital. If you look from a capital theory point of view, you're going to employ, and it'd be quite a project, but it would be a PhD project somebody could work out. If you take the net worth created by hiring government employees at your wage scales, which is better than normal private thing, and all the things that go with you, I think, from what I've studied, and I've studied some, the net increase in wealth to this area would be less than if the 8.5 billion flowed to the private economy and they didn't have all of the loads that you have on as the kind of body that the government mandates that you become. I think that you're doing the best that you know how to do. But I think that you have the opportunity when you decide how to spend this money that's coming in, and I think that's part of the reason why this litigation with the QSA was going, is that there was never a deal struck with the landowners onto the cut between the, on the income, the $8 billion, which my opinion was it should have been $10 billion, because you let Coachella off for nothing, but that's a whole different side because you guys have accepted the deal that you have. If you could put your minds around sending the conservation to the landowners and then letting them pay you your cost, as we used to do, to operate, it would prevent the bureaucracy from having these huge shortfalls, would save the water necessary to fulfill obligations, and you have a treaty with these other water agencies that they won't attack you, and then you have a long period of time to improve your system, but out of our pockets as the ratepayers. And it's a whole different look at the way you operate, but I think it would produce more wealth. You know, the guy that owns 40 acres that's worth $8,000 an acre today would be worth $20,000 an acre. And he could go to the bank and borrow and do things. And we would have industry, we would have, if there was like, then there's a whole series, a whole flow off of things that can come from that, which would be like, instead of doing a water management program where you guarantee water to these geothermal companies, let the landowners that supply the geothermal steam use their water to supply those guys. And then they can work it out amongst themselves where they get the water to farm if they want to. And all that will produce, I think, if you go out and get a good think tank economist, will produce more wealth. And by producing more wealth, there'll be more jobs for this, so many people in this valley that don't have jobs, that are capable. And I think it's a win-win thing. The only thing about it is it won't be a win for the bureaucracy that you have. And by showing this, I think it's very clear. Any questions?
Yeah, Rusty, on the $8 billion, I think it's over 1.2 billion of that goes to rebuild the total IID system, because it needs to be rebuilt so it lasts another 100 years. Some of that money goes for rate stabilization. In the year 2025, water goes to $25 and it stays there until 2047. And so money's going there for rate stabilization. And then I know the $280 million on the system improvement, which has to be done for the 103,000 acre feet. That costs money because you're borrowing the money, so the interest is eating up a lot of that money. And so I know what you're saying, and I know you don't like the bureaucracy of what the IID, you say it's a bureaucracy, but it's also a public agency, and that's the way the thing was set up. That's the deals that they made when the QSA got started. You know, it was 70,000 on farm, and or 130,000 on farm, 70 the system. The system has to be improved so that it can deliver the water to the farms. That's why, because they tried looking at trying to do the farms first without doing the system, and that was a backwards way of doing it. And I know that the farmers are upset because we ended up getting in a fallowing game till 2017, and there was no on-farm conservation. This thing just keeps getting pushed out. The farmers would like to be conserving water now and getting paid for conserving the water, but they can't. And the way the fallowing program is, it's not where everybody gets to participate in it. So yeah, it's got a lot of issues. But if you look back at the history of how we got to where we are, there's you talked about history earlier, didn't you say history? Well, go back to the history of how we got where we are today. There's a history there of why we are where we are today. And I know that some people don't like it, others like it, but that's the truth of where we're at. And we've got an item coming up here with the Mars that some of us want to take a second opinion and a second look at this thing to see if we can't make it better for the Imperial Valley. That's kind of the direction we're heading in.
John?
I have a question for Greg. There was 1.2 to the system, 2.7 to the agricultural landowners. That's already $4 billion. How much money goes to debt service? As far as when we do all these things, how much of that $8 billion will go to the banks? I'm guessing they're the ones who are really going to make the money over the life, not one particular year.
Yeah, let's see, we have $595 million.
In 1 year?
No, that's for the entire period from 2009 to 2047. But as I recall, there's really just the two issues we're talking about in 13 and 16. I don't think we're borrowing any money after that. So
out of the $2.7 billion, we will literally distribute $2.7 billion into the farming industry for on-farm conservation.
2.3 is the estimate we have for on-farm conservation.
But I guess my question is, are we going to be sending out 1.6? Because the reason we have 2.3 is because we're paying interest on the loan, or are we literally pouring 2.7 billion? Or 2.3?
2.3.
We are putting in 2.3
yes.
billion.
Can I respond to John?
Yeah.
I appreciate your grasp of the numbers, John. Thank you for I was only trying to talk in the grossest of numbers, in the simplest of terms. If there's $8.5 billion in income and 2.3 billion go to on-farm conservation, de facto, the rest of it is consumed inside the IID bureaucracy to save less than half the water. So my simpleton look at it is, that's not real efficient. Now, maybe you have contracted that you have to do it, but it appears that the contract might be falling apart and you can redo it and rethink it. And we did go through a period back in the history where there was going to be a sign-up, there was going to be a vote by the IID to okay the contract, and then there was going to be contracts offered to the landowners, and the landowners had the option to sign up and get part of this really good deal that was trumpeted by the Dream Team. And it just, to me, it looks like there's an opportunity, you have an opportunity to rethink. And so I'm trying to present you with one side of the thought, and the devil's in the details in the conversation. And I appreciate your grasp of them. And I have a little grasp, not as good. Thank you.
Yeah, and I know that the 2.3 billion sounds like a lot of money, but when you spread it on 475,000 acres, that's just short of $5,000 an acre.
Over 40 years.
Yeah, I know. So it's not a lot of money.
No. Thank you.
But, you know, I understand where you're coming from. So, but like I said, there's a history of how we got to where we are today. And, you know, we'd probably all like to cuss it. Maybe even the Dream Team would like to cuss it too.
Mr. Cox.
Larry Cox, Farmer Brawley. Just want to make sure I'm reading this thing right. It says without the QSA range, it'd be a loss of 5.1 million to a positive 3.2 million. So that basically be, we may be looking at $2 an acre foot negative cash flow, 2.7 million acre feet sales.
Mr. Brokey.
You're back right
Yeah,
there.
that's
the middle one.
Uh,
Bottom line, 5 million.
Yeah, that's what we're projecting it would look like without the QSA.
So at 2.7 million acre feet, that's about a 2 acre foot or $2 per acre foot loss. Shortfall.
Oh, if we were short, oh, you mean if we were short the $5 million?
Yes.
Well, yeah, a negative $5 million equates to.
Plus or minus $2.
Yeah.
Okay. A question, I'm not sure if you have an answer for it. If we do not have a QSA in 2012, do we go back to our allotment of 3.85 minus 1 and 2? Does anybody know that?
Well, that's a good question. And the real question is, what does it mean not to have a QSA? The QSA, by its contractual terms, is terminated if a judge orders transfers to stop and a year passes. It's unlikely that's going to happen. If the appellate court rules next year, it's already 2012, so that's dragging you out. But then the question is, what parts of the QSA were invalidated? They only invalidated 13 agreements. So there's a lot of unanswered questions about if the QSA is if the transfer is stopped by a court for more than a year and the contracts terminate. Well, then it's at least a portion of the contracts. Is it all the contracts? So there are issues about where we stand depending on what happens in court, and it depends on how it goes in court and how the parties react. So that's a really good question, and I don't think anybody really truly knows the answer to that. But arguably, we go back to square one. If we go back to square one, we have our full allotment. The federal government's entitled to challenge us under 417 for reasonable use, and there we go again.
Okay. I'm not speaking for the entire farming community, but the people that I talk to say that we do need a transfer, and we just need to have an equitable transfer. So I don't think there's very many people out there who are saying, hey, no transfer, let's just go back to the way we were prior to even Met 1. So hopefully we can get it done right.
If I could just add on to my comment on Larry's question, he asked about the negative 5 million, and it does equate to about $2 an acre foot. But if you look at the difference range, that if we didn't have the QSA, we'd be short anywhere from 27 to 35 million. So if you used $27 million as the number, it'd be more like $10 an acre foot.
in 1 year?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mr. Morgan.
Mike Morgan from Brawley. Whether it's been previous boards, whether it's been consultants, whether it's been lawyers, whether it's been councils or general managers, what that last or second to last slide he showed you tells you that the IID direction has left themselves in the hands of 6 judges, 3 in Sacramento and 3 in San Diego. The ones in Sacramento control 65% of your future revenues. The case going to them was on a loss, you're appealing it. The one in San Diego controls the other 35% of your revenues. That one you prevailed in on the rate increase. Those 3 judges can do whatever they feel is right on a 218. Historically, people have come to the IID to ask for rational behavior and ways to not litigate. Somehow, previous boards, previous general managers, whatever it is, or the lawyers you've used, have you in a litigation stance that puts the total future of the IID in jeopardy. Because if you lose either one of those cases, you're going to have to raise funds that are so significant that you will end up selling your power system. Now, how you've gotten there by litigating versus negotiation is something these numbers that Mr. Brokering put together you should reflect on. I personally think you went through them way too fast, but you should ask yourself, really, why are we here? Now, I noticed recently, I've shared with some board members a letter of reprimand or punishment from one of your lawyers for dealing in conflicted manners, found conflicted by Judge Candie over previous representation of our family. That letter, I don't know, I hope you've asked it to be shared with you, because it affects how he's representing you. But then recently, again, we found out he's been assigned to your 218 case that's in San Diego. So you've taken the same conflicted attorney that was found by the judge in Sacramento. He could continue to work on the QSA because it would be too much of a penalty for you to use him there. And somehow, someone, whether it's the board, general manager, general counsel, you continue to allow him to get more work. So ask yourself, is he part of your historic reason that you litigate? Okay, he was our attorney when we sued the district for flooding us in the 80s. He became the Bass's attorneys in the 90s. Then he became your attorney and continued to work for the Basses. So now you don't know who he's working for. But is that why you're in a litigation stance? Is that why, like Mr. Brokering says, you're risking losing either 65%, 35%, or 100% of these projected revenues? So I just asked myself that, and do it in closed session, but wonder why you're going down this path.
Questions, comments?
No, I only wanted to ask for this to be brought forward back on June the 7th. And I appreciate the fact that you'd bring these numbers forward. And we're being very transparent about where we are, what could happen, and what we need to do about moving forward in the future. And I think this ties in with the action item that's coming up, number 19, that we need to try to improve this thing, make it better for the Imperial Valley, make it better for the landowners that have to help conserve the 200,000 acre-feet of water moving forward. And I'm not, QSA, like I told Rusty, there's a history of how we got to where we are today. It's supposed to give us 20 years of peace on the river. It's supposed to do a lot of good for us, but it's caused a lot of problems for us too. It seems like the valley is the one that takes all the hits, and the coast, they want the water. We were found to be wasting water by the State Water Resource Control Board with Decision 1600, and we're always on the defense. And I think the rest of this board, we all would like to move to the offense and try to make this thing better for us. And that's, I know Director Mendoza was here when they signed the document in 03. She didn't agree with us, so she didn't wasn't part of who voted for it, but a lot of us have been around. Larry Cox has been around. Mike Morgan has been around. There's a whole bunch of people in this room that have been around for this thing for a long time. And it affects us. It affects the valley. So I'm willing to be open-minded, and if we can get a better deal, let's try to get a better deal. It's our water. We're the ones with the 2.6 million acre feet or present perfected rights. We're the ones that got capped at 3.1, and every time there's an underrun, MWD gets it. So hopefully we can do better at what we're doing.
Director Sanchez?
I'm not sure are we giving direction to Kevin to come up with a plan in
No,
case we're not?
this was information.
No, I understand that.
Yeah.
But is he going to be looking into a plan to where if we don't have a QSA? Because, I mean, it's information, but it's not going to come back next week for action.
Well,
There's no
no,
action on
it's
it.
just
So
an
we would
update.
have to ask Mr. Kelly that if we don't get that $10 an acre foot, what do we plan to do next year, and how we plan to address that?
Well, that's of course a daunting challenge for anyone, but thankfully there'll be enough time, and you'll have enough human assets that the board will at least have a planning period.
Okay, Director Desert.
Mr. Broken, on your last slide, page 15, the gross revenues, it says it's 37% of the IID's water budget. The QSA is 37% of the gross revenues for 2012 projected.
Yes.
And does that take into account, how are we taking into account the expenses that we won't experience if the QSA goes away?
That was on the previous slide.
Yes.
But on the slide you're questioning, it's just revenue. So there's no expenses that were involved in that calculation. It was just QSA revenue to total revenue.
And then, so that what I just said goes back to what Mr. Cox came to the podium and said, and you corrected, rather than being $2 an acre foot decrease, it'd be more like $10 an acre foot.
Yeah, if we were on the low end of that range on the difference column, it'd be more like $10 an acre foot. That's what the $27 million equates to.
And what dollar amount, how many millions of dollars was in our budget, our water department's budget this year? That was QSA transfer related.
Well, the revenue is around 36 or 40 million. I don't know the expenses off the top of my head. I'll ask if Bruce Williams may know that.
I think we talked about it during the budget time. That we talked about some $14 million being into the water budget out of the QSA transfers.
I'd hate to answer without having anything in front of me.
And how about this? Are you aware of how many years in a row now that we've been utilizing this money in subsidizing our water budget with the QSA?
I think every year that the QSA's been in place, it's generated a positive return as far as cash. I know it has the last few years since I've been
Okay,
here.
so it's been going on for a while. And when the IID recently did their water rate increases of $1 a year over a 3-year period, those revenues, those QSA transfer revenues inside the water department's budget that no one was seen or aware of until this last year, those were taken into consideration into what our water sales, water costs of service should be.
No, they've always been in the budget, the QSA revenue. So the only thing that was at issue was we were getting ready to arbitrate 2008 and 2009, and we settled that at the end of 2009. Mm-hmm. So that was, I think, the only thing that was up in the air for a while.
And the QSA water transfer revenues that the IID's received over the last 9-10 years, do we have a balance of that? How much in an account on a locked box we have, or is there none there?
Well, there's no lockbox. It's just in our general fund.
And do we know what our balance is? 80 million, 90 million?
I think we have in our general fund 57 million.
And that's dedicated to do on-farm conservation or systems conservation project?
That's dedicated to do any legal water department expense.
And that 57 million is transfer money. That doesn't include any of this potential 50 million from San Diego?
It includes all revenue, so it's not just transfer money, but it does not include the 50 million. That is
a separate deal.
Separate, and I think that the water department has around $200 million in cash right now. So that just gives you an idea. Some's restricted and some's unrestricted. Like the $50 million is restricted. We can only spend it for water system conservation projects.
So in our budget calculations that's been going on for the IID, we've been taking into consideration this subsidy of QSA transfer money that's been going into the water department's budget.
Yes, has been assisting the water department, as I think it should.
I think,
Not a secret.
but if I may, I think what Director Desert's referring to is that in the aftermath of the signing of the QSA, there was some talk at the board level about a lockbox, and in fact, the cost of service studies that have been done since then, the water rate increases since then, they've all been in addition to a dedicated revenue stream from the transfer that's augmented the water department budget.
I have a good.
He's got something to say.
Oh, I know him and then him.
Mr. Broken.
You in a meeting? I know who wants to talk.
We talked about water rate stabilization during the conversation. I mean, I know I'm only 33 years old, but for the most part, I think I've only seen prices ever go up. I've never really seen prices really go down. There's some things that go down. Having said that, if you can keep water rates at $20 for the next 10 years at a cost of $1 billion, wouldn't technically you would add that to the $2.3 billion to the on-farm conservation, because our landowners wouldn't have to spare that expense, or even our ratepayers. So I guess my question is, over the life of the next 36 years, between now and 47 years, with the rate stabilization fund, what would be the net difference of keeping the rates where they're at or where they should be, and what the total amount of money would that be?
Is your question if we didn't use water transfer money to stabilize the water rates, what would water rates have to be?
Right.
I
Over
can get you that. I don't have that number, but I can calculate it.
the life of 47 years, how much less would our ratepayers pay with inflation, et cetera, et cetera?
I can give me a week or so, and I can make
That
that
actually
calculation.
has been presented. I think it's from that Intrix study that there's been some question about, but you would have essentially $28.
Yeah, it was close to $30 an acre foot.
Would that even be in the year 2030, 2040, or are we talking about just today?
I think it'd be in the window of the 20s.
In 2030, 2040?
They had Mike King, when he was still the water department manager, had, I think in 2014, the rate was going to like $30 or $35.
Yeah, it was an aggressive. So actually, in response to Director Sanchez, there is an economic value to a constant rate over time, clearly.
Yeah, as our the landowners' competitors, their water rate rises every year. They enjoy the same number and can be more competitive out there.
Good point. Director Hanks, and then we'll go on to the next session, to the next item.
Yeah, Mr. Cock asked the question about what happens if the water doesn't flow next year, and there's a lot of concern there, because it looks to me like it's going to carry over into year 2012 in court before it's settled, which means there'll be a water order turned into BOR, which means regardless of what the courts rule, the water's going to flow. Now, whether the money comes with the water, whether there's a vehicle to pay, the BOR doesn't care about the state and our problems. They have a water order, and they lock it in at the first year, and it runs to the end of the year. So there's a whole can of worms that we're looking at. along that same line, and we'll be talking, I'm sure, here in just a little bit of some more issues. When you talk about a Plan B, a Plan B would involve an agreement that's hanging by a thread, but a Plan B would also include what happens if it goes away, and some of the things that were brought up. And it's obvious to me that in the budgeting process, we're going to have to start separating these costs, the incomes and the expense. So when that happens, we have a good identification of it. Because once there's a loss of fund, loss of work, we know what happens. And there needs to be a clear understanding of how those funds are being spent and for what purposes. When we talk about, well, what happens, All-American Canal. Do we just send a thank you letter for lining the All-American for us? We take back 3.85. There are so many issues, and these are the things that we're going to be trying to address with a resolution that will be coming forward here shortly. A lot of the things that we will be looking at is the advantage of being able to drive by looking in the rearview mirror where we've been. Past experience. One of the things I learned a long time ago, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. And with the judge's decision and giving us a chance to go back and look at some of these terms, we'll have an opportunity to look at making some type of correction, moving forward. But this is, there's a number of unknowns out there that has to be addressed, and it's more than just the income from the sale of the water and whether we move forward or not. It's almost like operating a computer. You can't make a U-turn. You can't drive around the block. You're going to have to back up. You have to back up to the point that started the whole issues that came forward.
That ends the conversation on that particular subject. We're moving on to item number 18 on your agenda, page 180. Transmission upgrades, Mr. Broking.
Okay. I'll be, as the first slide said give a transmission upgrade and talk about current FERC practices and developing rates. District is not FERC regulated, but we follow their practices. Using generally accepted FERC procedures, the district hired R.W. Beck to conduct a cost of service study and then to develop new OAT rates. As part of that study, it's FERC practice that interconnection costs are to be paid by the customer receiving the benefit, and network upgrades that benefit the entire system will be paid by all customers. And when I say all customers, I mean retail and wholesale customers. So it's pretty much a three-step process on developing your rates. You come up with a transmission revenue requirement. You allocate your costs to retail and wholesale customers, and then you design rates. How we developed the transmission revenue requirements, we used 2010 as a test year, and we have a pro forma adjustment of 150 megawatts of planned capacity for 2012. And we haven't done this yet, but before we ask the board to vote on any new rates, OAT rates, we're going to talk to our FERC council and get their input. So this is what we have estimated for network upgrades at this time. Generators are expected to spend $279 million on transmission projects that will upgrade capacity about 1,223 megawatts. And as I mentioned earlier, retail and wholesale customers will be required to pay for system or network upgrades. Payback of investment, and we're talking about the investment that the generators make in the system. There'll be issued credits on their monthly transmission invoice. Right now, we have that investment paid back over 25 years. At least that's what we have factored into our rate calculation. The payback credits that we give the generators will be included in the transmission revenue requirements, so all wholesale and retail customers will pay a portion of those costs. And the upgrades that are going to be made benefit the entire system by improving reliability, so all customers will pay for those credits. Risk and challenges in developing these rates, we are using estimates. What we're going to propose to do, because we are using estimates, is to do a study every year and have a balancing account, both for retail and wholesale customers, so that at the end of the year, it's the rates are based on actual cost and actual megawatts as opposed to estimated. And what we'll be proposing to collect the revenue requirements for the retail customer, we are going to propose a separate line item on their electric bill, similar to what the ECA is. And we, as I said earlier, we'd true that up each year. And we could, depending upon the size, but I don't think it's going to be that large of a charge, we could do it even more often than every year, maybe every 3 or 6 months. Wholesale, similar type concept. Their rate will be included in the proposed new OAT rate. But there are a couple of challenges associated with that. Once we develop that new OAT rate, we still have quite a few of our existing customers on a FACA rate that will not be able to be increased. And so currently we're getting about $2.3 million out of $14 million from our current OAT customers. So you're really talking about $11 million of revenue that is fixed. Our new rates that we're going to be proposing, and you'll see soon, are greater than our existing rates. Since the FACA revenue is fixed, we won't be recovering all of the wholesale costs that we should, especially in the near term, and that gets us in the fact that we would have a balancing account where we would establish how much we've collected every year to what it actually costs to serve that customer class and roll over any difference from year to year. So the current OAT rate is $1.92 kW per month. The FACA rate is below that at $1.82 kW a month. And if you look down at the illustrative OAT rate in 100% demand, if based on our revenue requirement and assuming that we allocate design the rates based on demand and no energy, it would result in a new OAT rate of $2 a kW per month on average, which is 4 to 5% higher than the existing OAT rate. And then and the impact of that for a low capacity customer, and we're using 25% as a low capacity customer, in megawatt hours, it'd be almost $11 per megawatt hour. And for a high capacity customer at 80%, it would be 3.42 cents per megawatt hour. Now, if you designed your rates so that you didn't base them strictly on demand, but you split it between demand and energy component, the demand component would be half of the $2. The energy would be $1.97 per megawatt hour, and that would equate for a low capacity customer, again at 25% capacity, at $7.45 a megawatt hour. and for a high capacity customer, that would be at 369 a megawatt hour. So you can see that if you went with 100% demand, the high capacity customer would pay about 10% less, or maybe 7% less. And if you went with a split between 50-50, a low capacity customer would pay about 30% less. The next steps that we are planning, we plan on holding stakeholder workshops. We're going to finalize, have R.W. Beck, who's now SAIC, finalize the report, hold at least one, possibly 2 workshops to get stakeholder feedback. We'll discuss the cost of service study and the rate design in much more detail than we're discussing tonight. And then after we hold those workshops and receive input, then we will be holding rate hearings, at least for the retail customer. I'm not quite sure whether we have to have a hearing for the wholesale at that point. So that's kind of what we're planning on doing. Stakeholder workshop will probably be within 30-60 days, hopefully closer to 30 than 60, and then get their input, either depending upon the issues raised, incorporate them into comments and have another workshop, or incorporate the comments and bring them to the board with a proposal.
I'd like to make a couple of comments. That in December of last year, Dr. Koch stated that a new rate would be ready for the first quarter of 2011. And in April, he said it'd be ready in June. And then between then and now, this new rate study has merged into a cost of service study. Well, how did it change from a rate study to a cost of service study?
Well, you actually have to do the cost of service study first to be able to do a rate study, because you want to be able to allocate the cost appropriately to each of the customer classes. In this case, it's a retail and a wholesale customer class.
So R.W. Beck, they did the cost of survey,
Yes.
the cost of service?
Yes.
Did they do it, or did they have to outsource?
No, they did it.
They did all the work themselves. They didn't outsource.
Right. Best of my knowledge, it was done by R.W. Beck or SAIC employees. That's who we've been dealing with.
That, how knowledgeable is R.W. Beck on the tariff and all these other issues that are needed?
They're extremely knowledgeable. This is one of their core functions that they do. I happen to know their national director of rates, and he's probably one of the best rates guys that I've ever met.
Did R.W. Beck or its consultant, if they couldn't do the study themselves, did they have an opportunity to audit the IID's FERC's accounts to determine if they were accurate, the accuracy?
I'm not sure whether they audited them, but I think we gave them that information. I think they looked at it for reasonableness, but I can't really speak for them as to whether they audited it or not.
Did R.W. Beck, did they find any inaccuracies in the numbers given to them by the IID Finance Department? Do you know?
I do not know that, whether that's true or not.
Well, there's a lot of questions here that I'm still not really satisfied with this, because we had talked about a tariff study, and now we're going with the cost of service study, and it's been delayed from December to now. And we have generators that are ready to go, and I think Director Hanks said about a wet blanket to that effect. I guess, Mr. Broking, I just have concerns with the process as it's going forward. I have concerns that we need to treat everybody equally and fairly. And I think you yourself said that you have done these, what do you call these, the rate studies yourself. You've done that. And you said because of potential litigation, we went to R.W. Beck. I don't know how competent R.W. Beck is in conducting this cost of service study. I really don't. And you might have more information than I do, but I don't have a lot of confidence in their ability to do so. And so that's why I'm questioning some of the numbers you have on the screen. Comments from this board? I know this is information only. You're going to hold stakeholder workshops. You're going to have rate hearings, and I'll have more to say at that time. But I can tell you right now that I don't have any confidence in the numbers you put up on the screen and the process of coming by those numbers. I don't know how the rest of the board feels about it.
Let's hear from the audience.
Well, comments from this board, or I want to hear from the audience first. I see Mr. Horn over there anxiously wanting to come forward.
I wasn't all that anxious, but
Andy, you're disappearing.
you wish I would disappear completely.
Well,
right?
yeah, I know that, but I mean, physically you're disappearing. Please,
Let me
name
know when my 10 minutes are up, okay?
I'm starting now. Okay.
Andy Horn, Deputy CEO of the County of Imperial. I also serve on the Renewable Energy Task Force that the IID put together, and I think thank you, President Mendoza, for allowing me this short period of time to ask a question. I think what you might have been talking about was because when Dr. Koch brought forward the variable energy resource tariff concept, they said that R.W. Beck would be doing some rate studies or cost of service. I don't know, remember what it was.
It was a rate study, not
rate
cost of
study,
service.
yeah. And I didn't see, now I see that R.W. Beck is being proposed to conduct this, and I didn't see any reference in here to the VER tariff, and it would seem like it would make sense to fold that into this. I don't know if that's being considered.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes, it was an intermittent rate geared specifically to solar.
Correct.
And
Or any
That
other
was your
intermittent
original
resource.
intent.
or wind, yeah, a variable resource, and Mr. Broking can clear that up, I think, in fairly short order. That was reflected in your sample rate sheet, right?
Yeah, if it wasn't recognizable to mirror
Well, I'm sure that was on
peons
purpose,
like me. Yeah.
but
Is that all the questions you had, Mr. Horn?
Yeah,
Surprise.
If it was addressed, then I'd like just to point it out, and if it wasn't, then if it could be discussed during this cost of service study, I think that would be, kind of two birds with one stone.
I think it's the slide before next steps.
Mr. Alawan, did you have a question or a comment? And then you can answer Mr. Horn's question.
I just want to say a few things. I'm Ziad Aliwan with Z Global. We work with a lot of developers here, and this is, I haven't been involved in the detail of the studies, but as you said, that this has been going on for a while. This has a huge impact on whether this valley is going to be developed for solar or wind, because the rates right now, basically 6 months ago, I think people expected the rate for solar and wind to drop by 50%. And what you're saying here is going to go up by 5%. That's what I'm reading this here. So I think, if you look at your neighbors, Southern California Edison and San Diego, the rate today, it's $1 per megawatt hour, about $6.75. So very big picture here. I don't understand how a transmission system in IID that, let's face it, although it's reliable, but it's not brand new, so it's been depreciated will be more expensive than transmission downtown San Diego or San Francisco for that matter. So I'm not in a position to question these numbers, but this is going to send a very bad message to a lot of the developers that been counting on variable rate to make sure that they can compete with solar project in Riverside County and San Bernardino County and other counties in California. Because right now, any project here have to pay this rate to IID, which is fair, but these rates are just not what I think the intent was from the beginning is to establish a variable rate, which will be at least half what it is now. It looks like it's just going the other directions, and I'm not sure what to say. That's not what Dr. Kalk said, so I'd like to see his opinion. What are we doing
You're
here?
obviously reading the slide incorrectly.
Okay, correct me, please.
The proposed rate is the middle one, proposed OAT rate, and this addresses Mr. Horns, with $1 per kW month demand charge, $1.97, and an average rate of $7.45, or a reduction of 30%. So we went from essentially a 1075 rate for 25% capacity factor resource to a 745 proposed rate for capacity 25% capacity factor resource, or roughly a 30% reduction.
Yeah, but we're supposed to get.
You're not supposed to get anything.
Well, if solar is 30% capacity factor, why shouldn't they pay?
Because I have to build a
anything
system.
more?
You know the answer to that. You have to build a system to meet your peak demand. We're trying to figure out a way to allocate cost accordingly. But if we do it on just FERC law, then we're FERC precedent, then you'd be paying 100%. So the concession that the district is making to the variable energy resources is moving from the third box to the second box.
Well, then how do you answer the question that the transmission is cheaper in San Francisco than it is here?
Let's see, they're at $6.50 a megawatt hour.
$6.75 megawatt hour.
75.
Yeah.
And so you have a system with how much capacity, how many megawatt hours on it? Is the ISO now about 60,000, 58,000?
50,000 megawatt peak, so you're talking about 213 terawatt hour a year.
And they've gone from 475 to 675 in 24 months.
Well, I mean, the rate, we can talk offline, but what I'm saying is it's just going to be kind of difficult to explain to developers how would they pay transmission rate in the desert that would be higher than downtown San Francisco. I mean, if you can help me answer that question.
It's not downtown San Francisco. It is all of the California ISO with the exclusion of LA, IID, and TID.
Right.
So when you have that many megawatt hours that can spread it out, then the fact that you're going to spend $1 billion on a transmission line under the bay, that you now spread across 25, 30 million customers with an industrial class that we don't have, it suddenly is not that hard to figure out why the cost per megawatt hour is significant.
So how can a solar project here in the valley compete against a solar project in Riverside? You know, if they have to pay more wheeling to IID than they pay for Edison.
Well, they don't pay anything for Edison.
Well, the load do. Edison load do.
The load does. The generator doesn't.
Well, ultimately they factor that in their bid. But I mean, how is it then a solar plant is going to say, hey, if you build in Riverside, you're going to pay less for transmission than if you build here?
Well, they recover their cost, as are we recovering our costs.
So if your cost higher then?
Well, apparently, yes.
Yeah, okay.
See, Ed, I wanted to ask you a question. When you said you expected the price to be 50% less, but it's gone up 5%, so I guess it makes you non-competitive with other areas. But who did you expect to pick up the 50%? If it dropped 50% from what it should be, then who's going to pay for the extra 50%?
Well, I mean, everybody got to pay their share. I think it's just well,
let me ask you this: do you feel that our ratepayers should pick up the costs, the extra 50%? Does that fall on the back of our ratepayers?
No, I don't think so. I think I was just surprised to see these numbers, and I don't know the background or the backup for all these numbers. I just look at it from the information I have is IID system is a fairly older system. It has been no major upgrade has been done since the mid 80s. Your depreciation.
We know that. We're not an exporter. We've never planned on exporting.
Right. So therefore, your cost is really mostly O&M cost. You don't have big capital, expenditure on, transmission for the last 20 years. So again, I'm looking at it from a big picture here. I'm not, I don't have the information. I haven't looked at the detail. I'm just looking at it from what other developers that are coming into the valley will do.
This board, as an elected board, our duty to our ratepayers, our fiduciary responsibility is to take care of our ratepayers.
That's right.
Who own this IID.
Mm-hmm.
There's about 140,000. It's our responsibility to make sure that some of these risks, whether it's solar, geothermal, and getting the power out of here in the coastal plain, doesn't fall on the backs of the ratepayer.
Now, I'm not questioning that at all. I'm just saying that your system, for example, today is underutilized. You have transmission capacity available to go to Imperial Valley substation that hasn't been used for 20 years. You import from the ISO, you don't export. It's been there for 20 years. Nobody is touching it. Maybe because the transmission is too high. So would you rather just say, you know what, it's there, it's available. Should I have a discount for it because it's already been paid for by the ratepayer? So I'm not talking about imposing additional risk on the ratepayer. I'm just talking about maybe some kind of rate, in which you maximize the utilization of your infrastructure, which brings money to the ratepayer. So, for example, you have a 300 megawatt of your transmission today, your capacity, that is not being utilized for 20 years. Today you want $10 for it per megawatt hour. Okay, would you rather have $5 and take this money and put it to the ratepayer because it's already paid for, or would you rather just sit on it and make no money? This is, I think, some of the out of the box, discussion that need to take place. That's
fine, but I know that, and this has been going on for a long time,
Yeah.
and I know that
Thank
Dr.
you.
Cole, Mr. Broking have been trying to do the best they can, working with the generators to get you guys the best deal so you can get your PPA contracts out of here.
Director Hanks, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I told the staff this earlier, and I'm going to repeat it for the public. We commissioned this R.W. Beck study, and the timeliness of it is terrible. It's after the fact. It's after the business models have been built by the generators and their expectations. The bids for PPA have been submitted and in some cases accepted. And now numbers and the timelines, when the board approved this study for the purpose of helping build these business models, is after the case. And I don't know what option they have now other than if we move forward with it, somebody's got to eat it.
Yeah, Mr. Broken, the requirement, is it based on for FERC estimate or the actual needs? Are we talking about what's going to be coming in the future for the rate, or is it current 2010, 2011?
Well, it's really a combination of the two. We base our forecast of what's happened historically and what we think will happen in the future. That's how you develop the revenue requirement.
And the revenue requirement, the old revenue requirement, was based off of our old system, and the IID had not reviewed or visited that requirement for quite some time. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, that rate hasn't been revised in a few years.
And we've heard that there's new transmission build-out going on, which would increase this rate when you have reached a significant amount of build-out. And we haven't met that rate. We haven't gotten there yet. We're just starting this process, correct?
That's correct, and that's why in our proposed rate, we only have a very small portion of that upgrade in our forecast.
And once we sign a deal with somebody about what the OAT's going to be, that's the rate that stays in effect until all accounts are settled.
It'll be in effect, what we're proposing to have it in effect for 1 year and then adjust it every year until we get a little more clarity on what all is going to be built out. I mean, the rate's going to look a whole lot different if there is a $300 million investment as opposed to a $50 or $100 million investment.
So the intention was, and Mr. Horn was here earlier with the committee with the county, that everybody knew that it was going to be a flexible rate every year, or was that just at the beginning of the onset?
I don't know what I haven't met with that group, and I don't know what their assumptions or understanding was.
I believe it was a workshop. I believe it was actually a meeting of the task force. And I think at that meeting, Dr. Koch offered a back of the envelope projection of an intermittent rate. I think it was a meeting of the generators.
An intermittent rate, but that doesn't mean it was going to be flexible every year. Intermittent was until we got the rate established.
Yeah, I think probably all along they intended to fold it into because one rate impacts others. But I do think at the time it was a subject of some excitement among the solar people because it was going to be, I think, the nation's first intermittent rate. Isn't that right?
I don't believe it's the country's first intermittent rate. It is not consistent with normal rate-making practices. And the primary reason is that when a transmission provider, such as the district, makes an investment, so we invest $25 million in a new line, that then provides a annual revenue requirement that we have to recover X dollars, depending upon how let's just say $2.5 million per year. Now, when you look at most entities, what they turn around and do is say, I want revenue certainty. I'm going to just charge for whoever uses that or whoever reserves capacity on that line. So if I want the entire capacity of that line, I'm going to pay $2.5 million per year, whether I use it for 1% of the time or 100% of the time. This is what Mr. Aliwan was just referring to. That it is not up to the transmission provider to take the risk of a revenue shortfall associated with underuse of a facility. Now, again, addressing Mr. Aliwan's comment, to the extent that somebody is willing to use the line off-peak, or the periods in which a solar generator is not using the line, then it's going to reduce the revenue requirements that you have to recover from that particular rate.
I understand all that. I just so that I'm not making a mistake here. It was at a workshop put on by the task force.
Correct.
And I believe at that time it was an intermittent rate that was going to, if not be the first in the country, then was certainly presented as an innovative.
It is definitely an innovative rate.
And I think that the rationale for going to BEC was that we didn't want to get it wrong, and we wanted to have corroboration from another source.
That's correct.
Okay, and in discussion with staff earlier, we talked about a comparison of the KNKS line, which is part of the acronym FACA, distribution.
Facilities and Construction Agreement.
Facilities Construction Agreement. Well, when they had their agreement, when they did the KNKS line, everybody's cards were on the table. They knew what they were. They knew what their commitments were. And those rates stayed the same until the payback and all accounts were squared up. The money they put forward and the credit they get received back from transmission over years. And here we are, we're looking at doing the same kind of a new build-out of our system. However, we're bringing solar into the mix now. Even though solar's intermittent use makes it difficult to coordinate and manage, and we're trying to get these PPAs on board so we can get our system built out, because we've talked about solar and all this green energy for quite some time, and yet nothing seems to be taking place. So the concern is we've made commitments, we've talked about what rates are going to be, what these guys have gone out and got PPAs, and now we seem to be changing the cards or changing the values that they're going to live by. I think there was some optimism on their side that the rates are going to be reduced by 50%. I don't know if there was overall optimism at those joint meetings with the county that there was going to be some kind of reduction. But I'd just like to see this brought back again for further discussion. We don't have the hard report in front of us, and I am concerned also about the timetables of this reporting that's coming back. I've got to believe there's been quite a bit of dialogue back and forth between the IID and R.W. Beck as to how they arrived at these numbers with the amount of time that has taken place. We talked earlier, there is no original version of this report that's been worked on and been massaged back and forth. This is the original version that's coming forward at this time. Mr. Broking?
Well, there's no written report, but we have their models. And yes, there has, of course, during any study, there's quite a bit of discussion back and forth between the consultants and staff over various issues, allocation issues, rate design issues, revenue requirement issues.
Well, just as there's been dialogue back and forth between staff and Beck, there's dialogue back and forth with board members and staff and industry. And there was optimism and hope here, and we were hearing that this rate was going to be somewhat lower, and this is still coming as some kind of a surprise at this time. So you've caught some people off guard here, and we need to bring this back and further digest it in the written report, behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, in public and transparent, however we're going to do it before we get to the workshops.
I agree.
Okay, then we're going to have to set dates for public workshops and subsequent rate hearings.
Yes.
And as you can tell, the majority of this board is not really pleased with the numbers you gave us
President
today.
Mendoza, if you will, Mr. Broking and Mr. Koch and I will confer with FERC Council and others about a timetable and advise you before approaching the board.
And I would implore you to come back with reasonable numbers. Thank you, Mr. Broking. I'm going to move up item number 24 next because we have some out-of-town visitors and they need to get home. Mr. Peschel, this is Central Facility Space Assessment, item number 24, page 201 in your agenda.
Actually, Paul and I are both going to be doing the presentation.
But your name's not as a presenter. Okay.
On the board item, it's not on the presentation. It is, sorry. If the board will remember, back in June 21st, there was a workshop presented by Griffin Structures that talked about the report that they had done based on the work that they were working on over the course of the many months starting in January. The specific requirements we're looking at for the space assessment and where the district could be going in terms of a new building. There were three components to that requirement that they looked at. One was the headquarters themselves. Control facilities include DOC, SOC, Water Control Center, IT Data Center, and emergency operation facilities as well. And the third component was to look at the central yard. Additionally, they looked at leased and owned properties and did an analysis of that, did some preliminary cost analysis activities, and looked at estimating what some potential operational efficiencies would be. And I'm not going to go through a whole lot of this material because it was, again, information that was shared at the workshop. But again, just for reference purposes, here's the map of where the current headquarters facilities are and the proposed campus over off of Barione, that the 80 acres as we refer to it as. As a result of their study, one of the things that they identified was the space assessment for headquarters facilities would be about 650,000 square feet, control facilities 195,000, and a central yard a little over 2 million square feet of facilities. They created four alternatives and made a recommendation. Again, they looked at is there a possibility of filling in the existing headquarter campus and using some minor adjustments or additives over in the 80-acre location, putting some of the new facilities over at the 80 acres and backfilling in the headquarters, a whole new everything over on the 80 acres in a phased approach, and then all new at the 80 acres built with Big Bang Theory. And the recommendation at that time in that presentation was number 3, that we really should look at the 80 acres in a phased approach. With that were, some of the ideas in terms of what that potentially could look like. First phase, the recommendation was, we're spending almost a little over $1 million a year in lease payments down at Valley Plaza. So the energy department functions become a high probability factor in terms of moving something to that location. Obviously, and we heard earlier some discussion around SOC and DOC operations. There's a need beyond just the SOC that, there's a need to harden facilities that, as businesses, including the IID, become more technology dependent. We really need to be looking at how do we harden facilities to make sure that we can continue and maintain business functions in the event of emergency situations. Yes, ma'am.
One question. On the first phase, is it possible to do the SOC before the energy admin buildings offices, or is it all going to be done at the same time? Or can we move the SOC up? Because
in the workshop, one of the things that they presented was that because of the requirements that are associated with WEC and FERC, that would be a very first activity that we really should be looking at. And as we go through this, there's an opportunity to discuss, well, what are the right things to be doing and what's the right sequence. So the additional phases would be, okay, after you get something going, then how do you roll in other things, and potentially even looking at the art operations. This is not to say this is the path that the board has accepted, because nothing's really been brought to the board for approval, but an estimate of what all that would look like would be $180 million. Next steps and where we want to be with where we are today is there is a need to really look at contracting a program manager and a support team to help facilitate moving this thing forward. And there's some details, and I'll go through that on the next slide. We really need to explore the detailed alternatives and provide some recommendations. Again, we got a lot of information that they put together, and there's choices that still need to be made and directions that we need to finalize a lot of that information. We can work on developing a final design plan, which include architectural blueprints, things like that. Because again, really all we've talked about is conceptual level. There's scheduling and budgets that would be associated with whatever the design choices would be. Recommend financial alternatives, and obviously bring that whole packet back as for the board for final approval. In that program management function, there's a couple of things that we'd be looking at. One is a master plan strategy, which consists of, again, a lot of information was brought to the table. How do we validate that information? How do we prioritize those thoughts and create some finalization to that activity? Really look at developing the initial phase approach for some milestones, identifying resources internally and externally, and there's another piece down below that we'll get to with that. Looking at developing some master budgets and facilitating that master plan approval process that would have to come back to the board for approval. Concurrent with that activity would be some program oversight, looking at contracting. Again, we got a lot of work to do in terms of, well, all right, if we're going to move forward with this thing, what's that thing going to look like? So there's a lot of design choices that have to be made. Simultaneously with that, there can be some additional work because we've got the 80 acres. There's still work that needs to be done. So how can we contract, and part of the program management function would be providing oversight, looking at those things that, there's engineering work that needs to be done, geotechnical work needs to be done, some civil engineering, surveying, utilities, CEQA activities. We don't need to wait till we have a final design. We can start working on some of that now. And so part of that activity from program manager would be helping us finalize what this thing should look like. In the meantime, moving forward with how do we get some of these things done. And eventually, as we get closer to having final approval of a plan, what's that look like? How do we do that?
let me say, I know that all 5 of us directors have been on multiple meetings dealing with the Griffin Group on looking at this new facility with option 3, which would be phased over a 20 or 30-year period. I know we talked about, because we got to start vacating Valley Plaza, that we would start a first phase, move energy and some of the other things. And so it's very important that we get moving forward. And I know the financial impact is $591,000, and we've been working with the Griffin Group. So I would just like to go ahead and make a motion that we move forward with a solicitation to hire a facility master plan program management firm, which I believe would be the Griffin Group, to provide oversight and facilitation of a primary site preparation, oversight of final design development, completion of a final proposal for board approval, and assistance with construction management selection.
Is there a second to your motion? I second the motion. Discussion?
Yeah, this work that's going to be done, are we looking at using some of our local people?
Exactly. That is specifically under the program oversight function. Those would have to be really local resources to understand the civil engineering, the geotechnical work, the surveying activities. That would be part of the requirement that we have. That it's how do we leverage as much local resources in putting this thing together as possible. And again, I don't want to confuse this preliminary work with actual construction work. This is how do we get something done on that property so that we can get ready for construction if in fact a master plan comes back that the board would approve and say, yes, that's what we want, go forth and go build it. That would be a different item, which would also hopefully incorporate using local resources.
Mr. Campbell, can I have Roger Torino, who's with the Griffin Group, come to the podium, because I know he has talked to some of the local people here.
Sure.
About using local people, because that's what we want to do, is use locals. Roger, would you mind saying that if you've gone out and talked to local people?
Yeah, actually, thank you, Director Menville.
State your name for the record,
Roger
sir.
Torriero, Griffin Structures, President.
Thank you.
In our role as program managers, we would be providing a managerial function and oversight. We would provide a few of the sets of services, but the vast majority of the services would be contracted out. In fact, that entire list under contracting support would be contracted out. One of the things I did personally was feeling that there might be a desire of the board to expedite this project, particularly with regards to the potential SOC, DOC on the site because of the drop-dead date in July of 2013. I went back and looked at some of the prior work that had been done by some of the other firms on this site over time. This project has a long history. I just went back to the acquisition date of this particular site, since the board had designated this as the preferred option to move forward there. In particular, I spent some time with Jeff Lyon from JBL and Landmark, and he's done a very good body of work that I think we could springboard off of here, particularly in the area of utilities and site analysis, which would be very helpful because, frankly, that's the first thing you do. The budget that we had presented, this $591,000, was a zero-based budget, meaning if we had to produce all this work from scratch, what would be an estimated cost? I think we can save time and money by taking advantage of a lot of the work done here by firms in the Valley and leveraging off of that moving forward. That'd be my recommendation.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Director Hanks?
Yeah, on the architectural design, would that also be looked at locally?
Well, I'll hear your answer first, and then
No, go ahead.
I'll choose to concur or make my...
I'll defer.
Well, go ahead.
Please.
I would expect that hopefully we could, but I think it's going to depend on the choices and alternatives that the board makes. Again, the size of the facilities could be something that we may not have the experience locally to do, but I think that's part of what the project management team.
We've got people that can do it locally. They know the weather. They know what we're up against. Construction, we may have an issue with bonding capacity. Some of the local people, but where they're subs, I've had experience of outsiders coming in here and pouring concrete and plaster work, and having to replace all of it. Mr. Sampson was on the school board back there. He can remember how we had to. The next go around, we got the locals and never had that issue.
And that's
so
why
there's some of those issues, and we're talking about money that was generated here. It needs to stay here, and if you're going to get my support on this, we need to use our local people.
And part of the responsibility of the program management function would be how do we put those proposals together so that we can leverage as much as we can with local resources. Absolutely.
If I could ask President Mendoza, is the motion and second to abandon the solicitation and to just award this?
Well, I'm the motion maker, and I did put the Griffin Group up because they were the ones that they had been working with on the 591,000, and they're the ones that Mr. Torino, in our meetings with, at least with us, when we met on 2 and 2 of the directors, said that they were going to work with the local people, and I think that they were brought in to oversee the Bella Master Plan and have it phased out, but we're going to use the locals. Now, if you, this is an action item, so that's the reason I inserted Griffin in there, because they would be the project managers. They would oversee the project, but they would be working with all the local people.
I understand that. The recommendation, which I assumed came from your working group that included the board members, was to conduct a solicitation.
How much more time would that take to do that? And
It could take, putting a whole packet together for an RFP and getting that out. Usually we post for 30 days, something like that. So it's at least 30 days, if not 60 days out to make something like that happen, yes.
well, I feel comfortable with the Griffith Group. They've been working with us now for some time, and with their commitment to hiring local people, I feel comfortable going with them. I don't know how the rest of the board.
Well, I think that when we say commitment to hire local people, it's our decision anyways. So whoever we hire, they have to follow the board's direction. Are you recommending for us to go to solicitation?
That's our common practice.
It's actually a board call.
Yeah.
I just wanted to. I mean the recommendation, which I assume followed the normal
Do you
process.
want to reword your motion, or?
No, I mean, if there's support to go with the Griffin Group, I'll go with the Griffin Group. If the board wants to pull that, go to solicitation, then we'll go. But we've worked with Griffin for 5 months or 6 months on going over this program and trying to make this thing workable, and we've been assured that they're going to work with all the local people. They're just going to be the project manager overseeing that whatever gets built properly.
So what the consensus of the board?
Jeff, do you have legal concerns?
I don't have any legal concerns.
In spending this kind of money, normally, should we don't go through the solicitation?
My concern is that I thought that the board was really concerned about sole sourcing and that solicitation and was a big issue. I believe it's written in some of our policies. I don't care. And I have nothing against these guys. They've done a great job. I'm just a little surprised. And I thought it was set up as a solicitation. But whatever you want to do is okay with me.
Is there anybody in the audience that has a protest? Or, of course, you probably wouldn't want to stand up and say anything, but I guess us moving forward with the Griffin Group. I mean, that time is of the essence, because we have leases that we're paying on the Valley Plaza, and as Mr. Torino has told us, it's going to be 2013 before we even put a shovel in the ground. And it's important we get this project moving forward, because we're vacating, so employees know we're doubling up in buildings over at Valley Plaza.
Michael Remington, Environmental Services. I just have a concern that we haven't picked a time when we're going to go to CEQA and have public hearings about what our plan is to build this new facility. And it kind of goes toward actually doing stuff on the ground, whether it's surveying or something else, and doing predetermined before CEQA. And you can be challenged on that by the public if there's someone opposed to this. So I'm just warning that.
We've assumed,
Roger's got
I've always assumed that CEQA is a necessary process, and it's going to have, but you have to know what your plan is before you can go through the CEQA. But if it's not in a timeline, it has to be, because CEQA is part of the process.
Yeah, because we had talked about CEQA the same, yeah.
What is the number of local business that would apply for a master plan management group? Do we have such people in the county?
My understanding is that it's a very limited. There might not even be someone, but the point is that the action that you at least contemplated was to find that out.
If I remade the motion and pull a Griffin out, and then when would it come back for, you'd go out for solicitation, what do you say, it's 30 days before you'd come back on that?
It would be a minimum of 30 days. Again, we have to put documentation together. Again, the intent was to get direction from the board to say, yes, let's move forward with getting somebody on board. The recommendation was for solicitation. It would take at least 30 to 60 days before we get information back as to who put a bid in on that process.
More than likely, that would be the end result anyway, but it was agendized as a solicitation.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. I will pull Griffin out and remake the motion as it stands, the recommendation without the Griffin group in there.
I second the motion then. Please
Okay.
vote. Okay. We will now go back to item number 19, page 189 of your agenda. QSA contingency plan. Mr. Kelly?
Yes, President Mendoza, members of the board, this item has been before you as information. It's been discussed, at least informally, during board member comments. It's now presented to you for action. It has been modified, I understand, from what was published in the agenda. I believe in reviewing the revisions that they're relatively minor and mainly consist of striking out the references to the general counsel.
Mr. DeMars is an attorney.
Yeah, Mr. Kelly, I just been speaking to Director Hanks. We just want to add one thing at the very bottom of the now, therefore be it resolved. And after it says QSA litigation, we add in within the limits of California law. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and make a motion to approve this resolution with the changes that the board has a copy of.
Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Okay. Discussion?
Yeah. Jeff, with the changes being made, is the scope changed at all? I can't see anything, but
I don't know how to answer your question.
well, I have a question. Why was the need to pull general counsel to confer with Charles T. DeMars with the general manager?
I'm not recommending.
Well, I'm not. I wasn't asking.
Yeah, I'm
that
not
question
recommending
on you.
the changes. I don't know what the purpose of the changes are. They
I'm
don't
asking the
really
board.
change much of the substance of the
Well,
resolution.
I'm asking. I guess Director Desert. He's the one that brought the changes.
Yeah, we just have heard some concerns from internal legal and concerns from external legal and concerns from other members from the ag community, and I just felt that this language simplified what we were trying to get to, cleaned it up for some of those other concerns, but yet says basically exactly the same thing that was the original intention of the resolution that was put in the agenda. And the resolution does not what I'm going to address now, I believe, is what your concerns are. It does not open the door to go after and to attack the old QSA. It's looking forward. It's forward thinking. It's moving forward, and preparing ourselves for a better strategy, should that scenario be needed.
I just and you stated you have concerns with the general counsel. I have concerns with Charles T. Dumars, yet I've conceded the fact that if that is who some of the landowners want at the table, I don't see why Jeff couldn't be at the table. Jeff and maybe even some of the other lawyers, because they've been there through 2003. So there would be some knowledge as far as what was given up, what was taken into account, the negotiations of the past. I think that would be helpful to Dumars. But now so the decision is, Kevin, that we basically leave it in your hands and to follow a 3-board majority vote. And I would think that you would have the opportunity to consult. You would have the opportunity to consult. Probably he doesn't have to be in the room, but when the meeting is done, as far as is this going to limit Kevin's ability to go out and get information from either Jeff or anybody else?
You'll recall that when we talked about this last, I think it was a couple weeks ago, we talked about the importance of treating it as distinct from the litigation. And on the one occasion that I did speak with Mr. Dumars, that was important to him as well. So I would be acting in conjunction with the board purely to define the scope of his work, and I would expect to bring that back to your board.
Another thing is, are we going to provide a workshop with Dumars available here so we can speak to him as far as what the board is looking for?
I think that
because he can't just go in and do something without us knowing what he's doing, because then that would tell me then he's coming in with an agenda other than me giving him through board majority the agenda to give.
No, I think that the intent is to take in divergent, even competing viewpoints, and to offer them up to the board for its consideration going forward. And this man would be working through me as your agent.
Let me make a statement. There's 5 of us up here, and none of us voted for the QSA. But we, because it was an action taken by a board, one of our boards, and it passed with a majority vote, and was put into action. We supported the terms of the QSA. Whether we agree with it or not, it was a signed document, and it moved forward. Those terms of that signed document are no longer enforceable, available, and it's going to change those terms. We will have had to accept ownership of it. And if that's the case, then it needs to come back. We need to give direction. We need to look at all the options. And like I say, we have an opportunity to, from some past experience, to be able to look at reshaping, reforming this, because we're so far down the road, as you saw in the presentation, it's be pretty difficult to back out of it, just to shut it off and walk away from it with all the other issues. And we need to know how to plan for it, how to plan for 417, things that were not in the QSA. And this board needs to get involved in it. It needs to have our stamp of approval on it. We need to have those discussions. I've been on the board for 5 years, and I've been involved in very little decision-making of the QSA because that was done 10 years ago, and it's going nowhere. And so now, as it's being reshaped, remodeled, or amended, it needs to have a fresh look. And when you have people sitting at the table that were part of the original one agreement, and you have parties that every party wants to hang on to what they think they had, and they're going to expect the IID to give up everything and let them have what they thought they had. That can't be, you know. And we need to be prepared for it. And moving forward, we've had advice from legal, what his concerns are, and there's ways to address that. And this resolution will pretty much give that direction. We have to operate within the limits of the law, and we will do that. But we need that fresh look, and we need to make some modifications. Otherwise, we're going to be here 10 years from now looking at the same thing.
Okay, I'd like to make a comment. I do not know this Mr. Damaris. I know the gentleman is from New Mexico, but I have a concern because he filed that amicus brief against the IID. As far as I'm concerned, he has a conflict. In reading the amicus brief that he provided the court, I went through it, and there's some of his comments bother me. For instance, he says that in his brief, he says that the Salton Sea has a right to the IID water. That's incorrect. We have never guaranteed a set amount of water to the Salton Sea. In his brief, he also supports the fact that the water belongs to the landowners and not to the IID. And that bothers me because when we celebrated our centennial celebration in this book that was published, A Century of Service, on page 64, it says, in 1911, the people voted to form an irrigation district under the state's Irrigation District Act. And what that vote meant, that there was public ownership of the water. And Dumaris seems to think the water belongs to the landowners and not to the public. I have a problem with that. And I don't think he really understands or does not agree with California law. He talks about a return flow. He talks about return flows. Well, he talks about the water that flows into the IID should be a return. We should be credited for a return flow. Well, return flows go to the river, not to the Salton Sea. So I just don't understand if he really understands the QSA. If he really is knowledgeable about the QSA, and yet he says that he wants to work. Well, some of my board members want to work with him on a separate path in case the QSA tanks. I don't need to pay another attorney $300 an hour to tell me that we need more storage, that we need to negotiate with the Bureau about additional storage behind on Lake Mead. That's something that we've been talking about. We have to be more forceful about that. I don't understand what he can bring to this table at this time, things that we already are talking about. And we can't go and negotiate with the other agencies. We're still in litigation at the court level. And until such time that the court adjudicates the case, there's nothing we can do. And now Mr. Damaris can come and make this wonderful plan. We'll put it on the shelf, and we can't do anything about it until such time that the court says, you know, you're right or you're wrong, or your appeal's denied or whatever. I don't understand why we have to spend additional money, which is going to be thousands and thousands of dollars, because I can tell you Mr. Damaris is not cheap. We just spent $84,000 on Mr. Havens. And that was money that I felt was thrown out the window. We didn't get any benefit from that. So we have one director that stated he would like to have Mr. Havens work under Mr. Damaris. That's more money out the window. I don't have anything against this gentleman. I don't know him. I just don't know what he can bring to the table at this time. I really don't. And for that reason, I'm not going to support the resolution. I think we're being premature. I know that there's anxiety on the board saying we have to have a plan B. We have to plan for contingencies. Well, we know what they are. This board has talked about additional storage. They talk about, so I just don't know where this is coming from unless we want to appease some section of the public that were not able to get their way through all the lawsuits they filed against the district. This is another way of them getting their way. I don't know. But I just don't believe that this is the right way to go, to spend money that we don't have, the water department. We have canals, we have drains, our water infrastructure is falling apart, and yet we're going to go out and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on yet another attorney? That's beyond me. I don't understand. Maybe I'm missing something. I don't know. Menville.
Okay, thank you, President Mendoza. I've met Mr. DeMars probably 4 or 5 months ago, or a little longer, when he was working with CRWS. I spent 2 hours with him. I was talking to him. He's a very down-to-earth guy, very intelligent. He's from New Mexico. He's worked with the Bureau. He's worked with other states. He's got a very good reputation. He's not California registered, but I think he's very capable of giving us a different approach, different view, different look at some of the QSA problem. And the QSA's got problems, and it got invalidated, and it has been a year and a half. We're trying to go to appeal. We're not going to change that. We're working on appeal. We're working on some other things. It's not about changing those things or changing courses. It's about just getting a fresh look of how we can help get a better deal for this valley. It's not about trying to take care of a small group of people out there that want something different. It's about protecting this valley. It's about taking care of the liability on the Salton Sea, and it's about trying to get us a better deal. And if Mr. Jordan, he's gone, or he's still over there, talk about history, we can go back all the way to MWD1 when we got $128 for the water, to San Diego in '96 when we got $258 for the water. And we've always been on the defense. It's time to go on the offense. I'm voting for Mr. DeMars because I want to look at something different, and I think it's a smart thing to do, and it's the right direction to move in. Thank you.
I have one last comment.
Well, that's very interesting. I'll say this one more time, Director Menville. About a year ago, you were adamant against hiring Mr. DeMars, against hiring Mr. Havens. All of a sudden, you made a swift turn to the other side. So
that's because I have a mind that can look at things and make proper choices.
It's because June 5th, 2012 is right around the corner, I guess.
I'm not stuck in my brain.
Director Hanks.
You know, when we're talking about a plan B, a plan B needs to start. It needs to start right here with this board, and we need to outline guiding principles. All these things that Director Mendoza talked about, that we believe needs to be in place to protect this valley. We need to establish that as the guiding principles and have a good understanding with the water experts that we work with, and lay that foundation. We don't need somebody from the outside telling us how we and when we deal with our water. When we have water available, then, and at the right time, at the right price, then it only makes sense. I think it would be anything less than prudence to look at those options. And it needs to be formulated by this board. We're elected. We've got to answer to the public out there. And we need to set those principles. And there's principles that need to be clarified in everybody's mind. And we take just bits and pieces of it, and it's very dangerous, some of those bits and pieces that we take and we talk about. And one of them is a public resource. The water is a public resource, meaning nobody in the public can own it for themselves. But there is a right to use that water. And that water is tied to the service area of Imperial Valley, Imperial County. It is defined. It is to be used here. And we have a fiduciary responsibility to maintain that water here. 75 years down the road, this water being gone, it will not come back here. But whenever our neighbors are in dire straits, and if the economy is bad, and if there's underuse, then there's an opportunity there. And there's an opportunity that benefits this valley. But we can't let people come in here and give us an entitlement of water and then tell us that entitlement is really not entitlement. We're going to move you from a 3.85 to a 3.1, and then anything you don't use, you can't store it. We're going to take it, and we're going to give you 0 for it. So whenever you are in the straits and you need water and you don't have storage, that's just tough. They're setting their standard and their requirements above ours. That water belongs here. And whenever it leaves here, it needs to be on our terms. And I'm talking about price, I'm talking about situation, and I'm talking about conditions. And we cannot send water away from here at a higher priority than what we keep for ourselves. And there's certain benchmarks that we have to set, floors we have to set, that we cannot go down below because we can't operate. And we have certain types of water rights that you do not want to enroll into because you cannot get them anymore. They no longer are available out there, and you better hang on to them. And it is a base. And where we're at, we're very close to chipping away into those water rights. And all I'm saying, let's take a look at this and how it benefits this valley as a whole. What is the best way to go about it? Put our heads together and try to come up with something that we can support.
Director Sanchez.
And we're just not there. We're just spinning our wheels where we're at right now.
Director Sanchez.
Kevin, I mean, the comments that have been made sounds almost as if it's been reopened and we're renegotiating. But that is not Plan A. Plan A, this vote is for a plan. I need to hear this before I vote. This plan is for a Plan B to bring people to the table to help us get a better deal than one we've already signed for, and have committed ourselves. None of our board members, you don't go buy a car and take it back the next. And well, now you can 30 days, I think. But so this vote is for a Plan B, which does not replace Plan A, which to finish the appeal.
Actually, I think the best source on that would be Director Menville. When this came up a couple of weeks ago, you stated that you wanted to keep all the options.
Right. We're basically running on 4 parallel tracks, and the DeMars is one of the 4 parallel tracks.
Right. So if that's the approach, then the best thing we can do as staff for the board, setting aside any concerns by legal counsel. Going forward, the best thing we can do is to give the board maneuverability, because everybody is modifying their positions. And by everybody, I'm talking about the other water agencies. So there's been enough movement there where it just makes sense to plan for either outcome, a good one or a bad one, and to have help doing it.
Right. Well, and the reason I continue to ask that is because I want to know if what we're voting here today will take the place of Plan A.
I believe that the if you were to go forward with this, that you would have 2 separate tracks, and you'd have a couple others that you've already identified. And one of those tracks would be Plan A.
And, you know, and that's fine, because my first is going to be Plan A, and if Menville and Hanks and Desert want to go with Plan B, that's fine. But for this purposes, this is just to create a Plan B.
This is actually a contingency plan, which by definition is a plan.
They would still have to vote whether to implement Plan B or continue to implement. There would be another vote to implement Plan B.
Exactly.
Okay.
I have a question, the last paragraph of the resolution. It says here that acceptable terms for development of a contingency plan addresses blah, 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 and scope of work. And does it say price? How much is he going to charge? Are you going to come back to the board?
I am, yes.
And the board's going to have to ratify that agreement at that time?
I am going to come back.
I'm asking him, not you.
I will come back with a scope of work, a timeline, and the terms.
And the terms, and then that'll have to be voted again by this board?
And I would assume so. The vote today would be purely to define the scope.
All right. Okay. Please vote. Do you want 10? Want to go to the bathroom? 10-minute break.
We got to go back to the 10-minute rule now. Can we go back to that 10-minute rule?
What? We're going to reconvene. I'm going to go to the 5-minute rule now. 5 minutes for each item. Going on to item number 23. Excuse me, Director Hanks, Director Menville, we're starting our meeting. Item number 23, page 200 on your agenda. Oh, we went up to 23. Well, let's do 23 since we're here, and then we'll go back. Generator interconnection agreements for Green Light Energy Corporation. Who is the presenter? Oh, he's not here. Well, can we just have a motion to approve? We go back to
Move for approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Please vote. Gloria, done. Okay. Well, let's go back to, where did we leave off?
20.
Number 20. Okay, we're done. Number 20, local entity 2010 competitive grant program disbursement. You got 5 minutes. 2.5 minutes for each one of you.
Good afternoon. We'd like to submit for your review and approval the request presented by JCS Construction for the release of their second disbursement in the amount of $100,000. As backup for this request, we'd like to inform you that JCS was awarded $200,000 just a few months ago. At the last local entity meeting, the board authorized a modified disbursement schedule for JCS, which allowed them to receive $100,000 upfront under their first disbursement, and followed by a second disbursement of $100,000. JCS submitted a package which was approved, containing their activities, the cost, the outcomes, and a timeline and milestones within each one of those. Within each one of those different disbursements.
Mr. Do you recommend the approval?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr.
Sampson, do you recommend the approval?
I concur.
Mr. Gotzik, do you recommend the approval?
Yes, I recommend based on them meeting the milestones.
We have a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Please vote. Done. 21. Thank you very much.
I've got a question for legal.
Oh.
I don't believe my conflict is still in force.
No.
No. So vote.
Okay. Yes vote.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Vote again, please. Thank you. Moving on to item number 21, page 197 on your agenda. Resolution in support of County Multi-Jurisdiction Hazard Mitigation Plan. Mr. Hatfield. 10 minutes. No, actually 5.
5?
Oh, yeah.
A bit quicker than that. What this is a resolution to adopt this resolution so we can apply for hazard mitigation grants. Back in 2007, we worked with the county, got our information, excuse me, our information in the hazard mitigation plan, and we're just looking to get this resolution passed.
How much money are we talking about?
It depends. I think we got, she's not here. I think we applied for 3 yesterday for 2.5 million each.
May I have a motion to approve?
I'll make the motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Please vote. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to item number 22, page 199 on your agenda, internal auditing section. Mr. Kaiser.
Good afternoon, directors.
199.
I have no comments concerning my section today. We have no draft reports to give, so unless you have questions.
Does the board have any questions?
Make a motion to accept his report.
Second.
There is no report. But
No comments is the
you
report.
can't approve. Well, okay, vote. But there was no file and receive, I guess. Your hair grew back.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just for you.
yeah, thank you.
All right. Because you didn't recognize me the last time.
I
even though
didn't.
said,
I
know
really
that.
didn't. I kept looking at you.
I was told. All right. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Number 23 has been acted on and voted on. Number 24 as well. Let's see, what else do we have? Number 25. Item number 25, page 210 on your agenda, Mr. Remington. Deja vu.
Yeah, okay. The former Rio Vista substation in Brawley. Here's the site. It's in the northeast corner of Hill Swing Elementary School in Brawley at the intersections of River Drive and Western Avenue. I just want to, since that we've pulled we did the assessment in 2010 and identified all the areas that need to be cleaned up of PCB. This is an image of the fence line where we decided we better make sure along the fence line that we don't have any contamination that may indicate that it has gone off-site. And we did find some elevated numbers along the fence line to the west and to the south. Here's the site itself showing the different colors show the different depths and different areas in which PCB are high enough that we need to either go down 1 foot, 2 foot, or 3 foot to excavate and remove that contaminated soil. We contacted, since we did the assessment in 2010, and that's our proposal to clean up the site, I decided to contact Department of Toxic Substance Control to do a voluntary cleanup application so that we would avoid any penalties for not having cleaned this up, and to hopefully get their oversight of the cleanup that'll match their requirements in order to get no kind of encumbrances or any kind of it would free it up for future use of whatever we wanted for that piece of property. DTSC was obligated to notify EPA because of PCB. I had an agreement with the Region 9 EPA and DTSC that I had already proposed in the budget for next year, 2012, to do the cleanup next spring during the Easter break, in which children wouldn't be on site to do the cleanup. And I got the agreement. This past week, the EPA National Toxic Spill Coordinator reviewed the project and informed the regional EPA that they cannot allow us to leave that on site through another school year or even part of a school year, and recommended that we clean it up before school starts on August 29th.
Two motions.
Yeah.
So I'm working on developing a major work authorization and have that to you in another week. But I would like to get approval to begin the cleanup as soon as possible.
Director Hanks?
Yes, for point of clarification, this would be bypassing our major work authorization. So I'll make a motion that for this work authorization, which will be coming to us later,
Yes.
that we suspend our policy to meet this requirement.
Okay, and you have a second?
Yeah, second.
Discussion, if not, please vote.
You got all that, Gloria?
What, you think she's incompetent or what?
Mm.
Are you questioning her abilities?
Motion now to
Okay.
give them to notify the schools.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Remington.
He's not asking as a secondary to approve funding in the amount, a certain amount?
Yeah.
I think you have to vote again.
Yeah, there's a second part of the motion, isn't
Yeah,
there, Mike?
on the second part of the motion.
Yeah. For the amount we're indicating right here. Now, the caveat is we still haven't gotten approval from EPA that our assessment of how much we need to clean up is accurate. It may go up if they want us to excavate more soil than we had originally planned, but this is the amount we estimate.
This
is what you're looking for right now?
Right now, yes.
Do you want that a separate motion then?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Excuse me, yes.
I would ask that you...
Come up to the mic and state your name for the record, please.
Carl Stills, head of the PMO. I would
How are
ask
you?
that you make, fine. I would ask that you make this motion for this amount plus the overheads that will go into the system, because there will be a little bit extra added onto that.
I'll make a motion to meet the needs of the MWA that you will be bringing to us.
Yes.
With all the requirements, and also to ask the staff to consult with the school and make sure that the proper announcements of the work that's going to be done is delivered.
I'll second it.
Well, yeah, as president, I was supposed to make that comment that we need to communicate to the school.
We have communicated. We got an agreement with them to pull additional, I didn't mention this, additional samples outside the fence. We pulled 33 samples outside the fence. 3 all came back non-detect except for 3 right near the fence line, which indicates for those 3 sites, we will probably have to take down the fence and excavate that material
Well,
too.
Mr. Remington, it's really important that we have open communication with the schools so that we're all on the same page.
And when we do the flyer and everything, we're going to be distributing to school, the teachers, parents, and everything before we proceed with the cleanup.
Okay.
I've been by the site numerous times, and as Mike mentioned, there is the secondary fence in place.
Right.
Okay.
Mike, after you dig the dirt out and remove it, are you going to fill it back in?
Yes, we're going to bring in certified clean fill material to place it back at elevation.
And would there be a need at that time to reinstall the old fence?
Depends on what you want to do with the property. If you're going to hang on to the property,
We can hang on to it and still not have to
we probably should put a fence up.
I think we should have a fence just to protect our
Phil
liability.
Swing would like the property.
Because we could possibly leave the internal fence out of there and have the external fence to keep the children from going in the streets, but technically we probably need to
No,
keep
I
it
think it's
fenced off.
important to keep the fence surrounding the property just to protect our liability.
Right.
Okay.
We
All
can talk
those-
about it later.
Yeah.
All those in favor, say aye. I mean, just vote. Jesus. Okay, thank you. We have one more and we're done before 6. Item number 26, page 217.
Move for approval.
Checks and wires for July 2011. You're
Second.
smiling, Mr. Broking, after today. Look at you. I don't ever see you smile.
I move we
Haven't
accept the
heard
receipts.
you laugh, but
Move we accept the receipts.
is there a second?
Second.
Any comments, Mr. Broking?
No, it's just our regular monthly report where we highlight the transfers and the checks.
Please vote. Okay. Mr. Kelly, is there any further business to discuss?
No, President Mendoza.
No? Then meeting is adjourned.